This experiment requires one microlab system accompanied with a pH probe and a drop counter. You're going to need 2 stir plates and a stir bar, a couple of beakers, some standardized sodium hydroxide solution or some other base, water to clean things off, goggles, gloves, Coca-Cola, and a delivery burette.
To begin our experiment, pour 250 milliliters of Coke into a beaker on top of a hot plate. Make sure you put a wash glass over it.
While you're waiting for your Coke to boil next door, you should take this time to calibrate your pH probe using the microlab system. If you don't already know how to do this, I would suggest going to see Dr. K for more information. Once your 250 ml of Coke has started to boil, you're going to continue boiling it for 25 minutes. The purpose of doing this is to expel the carbon dioxide that's in the solution, and the watch glass keeps carbon dioxide from the air out of solution. The process of getting rid of this is to keep our titration and our pH curve from being goofy.
Once your Coca-Cola has boiled for 25 minutes, use a heat glove to remove the beaker from the hot plate. Make sure you leave the watch glass on top of the beaker while it's cooling. Once the solution has cooled to room temperature, pour it into the burette. It is essential to drain some of the Coke out of the burette into a waste beaker in order to ensure a qualitative transfer for your titrations. If necessary, add more solution to your burette and then re-zero.
And now we can actually get started on our titration. Transfer the Coke solution and stir bar to a new stir plate. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your pH probe and the buffer, and you're going to begin setting up your system for titration. Insert the pH probe into the drop counter. Lower the drop counter until the pH probe is in the Coke solution. Now, if you're not sure if it's actually touching the liquid or not, you may want to look at the microlab system to see if the pH probe is picking up a reading. Then you're going to take the dropper and you're going to position it in such a way so that every drop of base falls through the drop counter and is recorded through the microlab system. This way you can know how many drops of base you added to the Coke solution. Then you're going to click Add Devices on Microlab, and you're going to add the drop counter and the pH probe. Now that we've added our devices, we want to drag and drop each device to a part of the graph. You're going to drag the drop counter to the x-axis of the graph and the pH probe to the y-axis of the graph. Now you're going to take your standardized base, in our case it's 0.1 molar standardized sodium hydroxide, and you're going to fill the dropper. Take precaution to make sure that the spigot is actually closed so that when you add the base, a bunch of base doesn't just fall into your Coke solution, ruin your titration. If you want to, I'd move it out of the way just in case, because this has happened to me before.
Now we can begin our experiment. Start collecting the data using Microlab, then start the drop counter to begin titrating the Coke with the sodium hydroxide. As your titration progresses towards the endpoint, this is the graph you should see by using the Microlab system.
When your titration is done, you should have a pH curve that looks something like this. Since we're titrating phosphoric acid, it has 3 equivalence points, but since the third one is so minimal, we can only see 2, as indicated here. And here's what your information looks like when it's exported to an Excel sheet. You have the counter counts and the pH measurements. Then what you do is you take the first derivative of your pH, the second derivative of your pH, and then you take an average of the values of there for a smoother curve fit. Below you can see our pH curve from our titration. It looks very familiar to what we saw using Microlab. And then above that, you will see a graph of the first derivative of this titration. The maximum point between 70 and 80 there marks the equivalence point of our titration. This shows us how many drops of NaOH were added to neutralize the phosphoric acid in the Coke. So once we know that value, we simply perform dimensional analysis to find out how much phosphoric acid was in the Coke.